Welcome to Belong. Today's guest is Daniel Midgley from the Because Language podcast, a podcast about linguistics. I'm a huge fan of Because Language, and I've been a Patreon subscriber for a few years now. Daniel does an incredible job fostering belonging in the Because Language community. He also shares some great advice in our conversation on how to make people feel more included. I hope you enjoy our chat as much as I do. I have wanted to chat with you about this for a while. I know, you run Because Language and the community around it and everything. I know you do a lot around the community aspect and the promotional aspects of the podcast. As well as, I see you in the Discord community all the time. And I think where I want to start is when you start a podcast, it's a medium others are going to consume. And so it's not really interactive. At what point did you start adding in interactive components to it?
We were pretty lucky on Because Language because in our earlier incarnation, it was a show called Talk the Talk, and it was on a community radio station. It was always just
Got
intended
it.
to be a radio show. So it had listeners who were listening in the moment. You had kind of a built-in community. And we kind of played on that. We invited listeners to, suggest themes or to send me an email about what you're hearing, and we'll read those comments at the end. And so it was really quite natural for us to be doing that. Radio is an amazing medium. The immediacy of radio really comes with its own built-in community.
Right.
And then when we left the radio station, RTRFM in Perth, and we took our podcast indie, we were able to retain a lot of those features. We weren't able to sort of trade on the community ethic or sort of borrow that contribution things. We had to kind of make it ourselves. We had a community, we had a tradition of giving people a chance to contribute and interact with us in the usual ways. And so we just sort of carried that along. Having that radio show really did teach us how to do it. Not everyone can have a radio show. A lot of people have to start with a podcast. And so those techniques that we've used are still available to you. And I guess we'll talk about those as we go.
Yeah, but you're switching from synchronous to asynchronous, right? If it's a radio show, they call in, yes, they could leave a message if you can't take them on the air, but you could take them on the air. Whereas a podcast could be consumed at any time, anywhere,
It's true. There's a workaround, and that is doing live shows.
which I love, that you guys do
Yeah.
that.
It is. It's fun just piling everybody into a Zoom room, having a couple of hosts. It's big and exciting. And I remember the first few times we did it, people were like, "Oh, wow, Daniel is standing there and he's saying the things. It sounds like a real show. I can't believe I'm here." So that was really fun to have it. And yeah, the live shows are a way that we sort of bring back some of that real time feel. And we like doing them, and we're going to be doing more of those.
Right. Right, but even when you left the radio station, I'm assuming you had to find ways to recreate that same feel you had in doing a live show.
It's true. There
What?
are a couple of things that we've done. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, it
Oh,
sounds like you had an
no.
idea.
Maybe I'm asking the question the wrong way. Um, you have like the Discord community now, the folks supporting you through Patreon. They're there, they're engaging. Um, Before that built up, was it just people emailed you, sent you messages on the social channels? Is that how you started getting people connected?
It was. We made sure that our email was available. We were also very active on social media. We took out the accounts for every new thing that popped up, and a lot of new things have been popping up. We were very active on TwitX. We were very active on Facebook. Some of those have dwindled a bit as I feel like a lot of people are leaving social media or aging out of social media. We also found a way to make it work on Discord. Discord is your old school forum sort of
Right.
site. And we've just found that that works really well to bring a whole bunch of people together. The Facebook communities, the TwitX communities, they're very good. Blue Sky is now becoming, I think, bigger in terms of linguistics. There's a lot of linguists hanging out there, although I don't know if everyone else is. But Discord has been amazing. Being able to find that has really taken over a lot of the work of the former social media sites, and it's become a really strong way that people have been able to contribute and suggest stories and ideas for the show, and also just hang out and have a good time.
Right. And I
So I
mean,
guess
you even have craft channels, and I saw a recipe this morning. Like
photos of
folks are
pets.
100% in there.
Yeah, maybe that's a tip. Give people a chance to talk about things outside the area, show off a bit of themselves, because
Right.
when they show off a bit of themselves, that people like to do that, and it's something that they're an expert at. And then it's not just about linguistics, it's about all of life, which is really what we need to bring in. We sometimes in the linguistics community, in the lingcom space, we sometimes remind each other we're not each other's competition. Like the other podcasts, like the Vocal Fries and Enthusiasm and Bunny Trails, we're not each other's competition. The real competition is non-linguistic interests. It's
Right.
the other podcasts. It's human relationships. It's other hobbies. These are the things we must defeat.
Right.
Oh, sorry. We must co-opt them. We must bring them into our site, and then it becomes not. You're not just talking linguistics. You're hanging out and chatting with friends about stuff that matters to you, whether that's language or not.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed you guys are really good at bringing in a lot of those other linguistics podcasters. Many people are, guest hosts multiple times. Is that just kind of the nature of that space?
Well, we kind of just liked those people. And also, we made a conscious decision a long time ago. So, okay, story time. And I've told Lauren and Gretchen this. Lauren Gaughan and Gretchen McCulloch of Enthusiasm, they didn't have a podcast, but they were going to start one. And I got wind of it. And I thought, oh, man, these people are so amazing. This is going to be such a good podcast. Oh, no, no one's ever going to listen to us again. We're nowhere near as good as them. But I thought, no, this is good because a rising tide lifts all boats. So we went out of our way to promote them, to tell people about them. And whenever there's a new one, I'm like, this is a good one. I just found out about these people, and you should check them out too. And that way, it's not just us. It's Coke and Pepsi, right? It's like you've got, what is it? Pepsi doesn't just have Pepsi. They've got Mountain Dew. They've got, what else do they have?
Yeah, I don't
I don't
know.
even know.
Other brands.
But when you go to the shops, then you don't feel like a Pepsi. You might choose something else that's in the Pepsi space, and therefore you're contributing to Pepsi. Well, you've got so many good linguistics podcasts now, and so by maybe if you don't want to listen to Because Language, you'll listen to one of them. They'll be more your taste, but you're still connecting into this network. And then if you do listen to Because Language, you'll be listening to one of their hosts on our show, or a linguist that we like, or just somebody, because that's the way that you bring in popular linguists into your community, so that you're promoting them and they're promoting you, and it just goes higher and higher. So
Right.
we love having lots of hosts on, lots of guest hosts. It's interesting. It works. They have expertise that we don't, and people like to listen to them. So it makes for a more enjoyable show.
Definitely. I mean, I've enjoyed all the ones I've listened to. When you're talking about the show, when you're promoting it, or you're putting messages out there, as a linguist, are you giving thought to the language you're using? Like, in terms of, I'm always afraid to say making it inclusive, because that has such loaded meaning nowadays.
Oh,
It's you are you conscious of how you're approaching things to make it appeal to the broader audience and make people feel more connected to it?
I can't say that I'm really overthinking the language that I use, which sounds kind of unusual for a linguist to say because overthinking language is kind of my job. But are we thinking about the terminology that we use, or one thing that I do is I I try to bring down the jargon. Try to bring down the terminology. Some linguists have a policy that they just don't do jargon, or they'll allow themselves one element of jargon. I think that people can handle a lot more jargon than we give them credit for. And so if I drop in a term like morphology, now in linguistics, this is a fancy way of saying the parts of words that have meaning. And
Right.
I got a lot of experience I was a linguistics professor for 18 years, and I got good at explaining stuff to students. So that became part of my craft. So that's one way that I handle the language that I use. But are you thinking of something different?
No, I mean, I think making what you're saying more accessible to everyone, in terms of clarity makes total sense. Um, yeah, I mean, there's research out there on like the language of belonging, and it's usually in more cultural context versus, you know, you as a linguist trying to reach non-linguists who would still find the show fascinating, and kind of getting to them. Yeah, I wasn't sure, like, if that was gonna be something that you give conscious thought to, but it makes sense, in terms of bringing down the jargon or at least clarifying it, does make it more accessible to folks.
There is another thing that we really do think about a lot and stress over, and that's looking out for discriminatory language, ableist language. Um, so, for example, we talk about pronouns a lot on the show, and how they have a long history. We talk about how they, for one person, is something that has a long track record in English. It's been around for over 1,000 years. We've been using singular they for longer than we've been using singular you, which is fun. And then we try to call each other out when we use language in discriminatory ways. Like we had a period where we were using crazy and insane to say that something was weird or wild or something. And so we've talked about alternatives to that. Why do we do that? Well, because if you say that something is lame, oh, that's lame, and we would think nothing of it. But what if somebody doesn't have such an easy time walking? What if somebody has a history of mental illness and that puts them offside or makes them feel bad about getting help, which is what people in that space say is happening. If you use language in a discriminatory way, well, it can have discriminatory effects. And so sometimes if one of us uses the word crazy, oh, that's crazy. Another one of us will say, hey, when you said that's crazy, what did you mean, really? Yep. Okay. What I meant was that it was unexpected or very strange. Oh, right. Okay. And um, it's just a way of showing respect, using someone's correct pronouns or avoiding using discriminatory language, especially around mental illness or autism or things like that, just means that people whose lives involve those conditions, they know that we're thinking about them. They know that we're trying to do better at approaching these things in a good way. So that also can increase the sense of belonging and hmm, make sure it makes sure that what we say is clear. It makes sure that what we say isn't an impediment to understanding, that we're not throwing something unexpected or something that's going to make somebody misunderstand our intention. It's just part of being clear.
Well, and I think the three of you, you, Hedvig, and Ben, I feel like I am sitting listening to a kitchen table conversation. I mean, you all have such great rapport that I feel drawn into it versus like, wow, they've got something there and I'm on the outside. I feel like I'm pulling up a chair and just, joining you guys.
Good. I'm glad that comes through. I think that the rapport between us helps. I've been working with Ben for, a long time. When were our first shows? About 13 years ago. So Ben and I have been doing shows, and we must enjoy it because we keep on doing it and we know how to read each other really well. It's fun to interact with Ben in an actual space where we're reading each other and we know how to play off of each other. And then Hedvig is of course fantastic. She brings a lot of fun too. But we're each kind of different and we're each kind of a little spiky and we're each sort of trying to be funny and trying to share some knowledge. So I think the fun really comes through. So if you're a podcaster and you're trying to make sure you have that kitchen table sense, maybe just pick good people, um, be curious, talk to each other, and don't overthink it.
Right. No, I've noticed for every episode, you are coming in with your list of items you want to cover, but it always seems like there's room for flexibility based on what everyone else is bringing up. And I don't know, for me, I like that because there is like, I feel the spontaneity when things like that happen. And personally, it just makes me feel more invested in what's going on. Was that originally just something you planned in the model? Did it come from the fact that you were doing radio and they were live and you really never knew what kind of a call was going to come in?
It's true. You never really knew. You might be referring to the way that before we have a live show, we put out a run sheet to everybody. A run sheet contains all the things that we're thinking of talking about with links so that everybody can see it. And then we get into a live show. Oh no, things just start dropping out. Or I'll say, does anybody have a new thing? And so somebody will come in and say, this was a thing. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But that's probably because I've learned to read the room. Reading the room is really big. So the way I learned to read the room was by giving hundreds and hundreds of lectures to live audiences of students, just being a first year linguist teaching at a university. And I would teach a big lecture and you could feel when students are losing the plot and you can tell when you've got them. So you can hone that. Then you teach 4 tutorials that day and you read the room there. You can tell when it's late in the semester and everyone's exhausted and you need to have a contingency plan. That's why I put too much on the run sheet. You got a contingency plan so you can add more things, you can drop out things. But often on a live show, I will be feeling it and reading the room and saying, okay, I think we're done with this area. It's time for a change up. And I don't know how I got that sense just by doing it over and over again. So you can develop that sense. Do you feel like this part has run too long? Do you feel like you're going to be losing them? I can feel it even when it's not a live show. It's like, okay, you know what? We're going to skip that story and we're going to go on to the next bit.
That's come from so much practice doing this.
Exactly. This is part of your craft. This is part of your craft. Are you losing the audience? Are you getting there? Do you feel like you've explained things appropriately? Is there more to say? When do you cut off, even though there's more to say? And when do you keep going? You can always edit later, but sometimes the flow matters. You can pay attention to the flow.
Yeah, I definitely see it. One area I wanted to talk about is the use of storytelling, and especially when you're talking linguistics, in almost every case, you're bringing it up in a certain context. So you have a way to frame it as you're talking about it. Is that, again, something that you plan to do, or is that just kind of how it's naturally evolved?
I definitely plan to do that. Storytelling is what we do as humans. Things don't really land unless they're relevant to a listener. We always stress about the so what. We talk about the who, what, where, when, why, but we also want to talk about the so what. Why is this relevant? Because if it's not relevant, then it's not going to matter. So we do that in a couple of ways. Whenever there's a research story, because we cover linguistic research, I try to find out, what did they do? Was there anything interesting about the way that they did the experiment? And sometimes we'll have the experimenters themselves on and they can tell the story. But often you've got to find out, okay, what did they do? And how can I tell this story in a way that will make it stick for people? Otherwise, it's kind of just boring results. The other thing is making sure that you focus on people's stories. So we sometimes we'll have a researcher come on and tell us about their work, but then I'll ask, what got you into this? How did you do this? And then they start telling their story and why it's relevant to them. Sometimes it'll be because a linguist is trans and that affected their work in a certain way. And so getting them on to tell their story. One of the questions that we address is how language started in the first place. And it's a really complicated story that goes back millions of years. But imagine humans who live together. What kind of things are they doing? Well, they're communicating with each other to figure out where the food is or to help each other do things that one of them couldn't do alone. Then someone figures out fire. Now they've got control of fire. Now they're sitting around at night around a fire, which is good because the fire is warm and everyone's together and it keeps the bad animals away. And also it artificially prolongs the daylight so that they have a bit more light. They don't have to go to bed right away. So they're all just sort of sitting around this warm fire together. What are they doing? They're inventing language. They're inventing culture. They're telling stories. They're creating a mythos that will bind them together and make them feel like a community. I think the fire was one of the most important inventions to the creation of language and the creation of community and the creation of culture, because now we're telling stories to each other. We're making it happen. So it's natural to have that sense of community on a language podcast, because building community is one thing that language not only is very good at doing, it's probably one of the reasons why we have language at all, because we had a community that could sustain language and then language sustained the community. So yeah, I just told a story there and you could kind of smell the fire, you kind of imagine the people, make it vivid. Storytelling is so important to make things stick.
I'm going to jump around a little bit here. How early, after the radio show, how early did you start doing the live episodes?
Let's see. We were doing live shows even when we were a radio program, because the radio station RTR-FM was centered around Perth, Australia. And so we would sometimes do live shows when we could. We would get invited to festivals and do a live episode there, and that was really fun. We got used to how to do that. Getting good at that was kind of tricky, but I guess lots of people are good at it now. So then we switched to indie, and we how long did it take for us to start doing live shows? I don't think we started on it right away. Let's see. Here's our list of episodes. And we're going back to the beginning. It took a while.
That's not surprising. I mean, when you set out as an indie podcast, you don't have that infrastructure behind you anymore.
That's true. It took us about a year to be able to sort of get our feet and do our first live episode. It was for Lingfest 21. So that would have been about a year and a half after we went indie. And it was a good experience. So we realized, okay, this is a perk that we can offer to people who like our show, that they can come to. And it's turned out really well. We've enjoyed the shows where people can vote. So we use the features of Zoom. People can vote on whether they think two words are related or not, or whether they say that bi-weekly is once every 2 weeks or twice a week. And so and then the chat, oh my gosh. So you got two channels going on. If you watch one of our live videos, you hear people talking and people jumping in and contributing, but then you'll also see spilling down the screen the chat messages, which people are sending to each other as kind of a second subtext running underneath the main text. And people will comment on what's going on, or they'll comment to each other's messages. So yeah, chat is a really good feature. A lot of podcasts do it. It's fun to, whenever I see somebody else doing it, I look for ideas on how to make it work better. Sometimes it'll just spill up the screen, and you can, it's another way for your attention to be captivated.
Definitely. And it tends to get very fast moving as people get going. Definitely hard to keep up with sometimes.
Can do. Especially the reactions as people sort of fire off reactions to each other's messages.
It took about a year to get back to the live events. How early did you start building out Patreon and just, In interest of disclosure, I am a Patreon subscriber of Because Language. But
And thank you for that.
how early in the process did you start?
We had Patreon. We had a Patreon account before we went indie. So for the last couple of years of the Talk the Talk podcast, we had a Patreon account, but we weren't very aggressive about promoting it. People liked contributing, so we let them. But we also encouraged them to contribute to the station. There was because the community radio station relies on donations as well for their support. So there was kind of a tension there, and we contributed a lot to the station, and people contributed to us. But eventually, we decided that it would be a lot less conflicting if we could just be ourselves and have our own patrons. So that was how that was. That was really beneficial because then it gives people a way to contribute. Community involves a couple of things. It involves a way to contribute and also a way to interact. And those two things are very evident in the show. Like we started doing a segment called Related or Not, where you have to guess if two words are related or not, like flour, the wheat stuff, and flour, the pretty things. And we invited people to make a theme song, a jingle for us. And people have. Someone generated a bunch via AI. We've got people who give us a little bit of a song that they sing, or someone gives us a piano bit. Someone has just given us a bit on guitar. So it's so interesting to see how when you are creative, see if you can find a way for others to be creative too, because creativity breeds creativity, and that has been really, really nice to see. Not in the way of expecting free labor, because you are kind of inviting people to do work for free, but just be clear about that and try to recompense people in appropriate ways. Give them props, share the spotlight for them as well. But so that's one is, invite creativity, invent contributions. One of the really important things on the Discord website is that people can give show ideas and story ideas, and related or not ideas. So that's super good. But then the other way is just if you aren't feeling very creative, if you're not contributing so much, you can still come and hang out and meet up with the people. So that's been an incredible part of our Discord community. The Because Language experience is just coming, sharing your Wordle scores, nothing else, anything else, or just, pop a reaction onto somebody's message that you liked. People are really able to engage deeply or just in ways that they like. People can choose their level of involvement. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of having some sort of forum that people can come to. And that way they contribute or they just hang out. Let me just talk for a second about why community is so important in the linguistic space. We've mentioned that, community is part of language and language is part of community, but also it has to do with beliefs. There are some beliefs in language that are actually quite damaging, and some seem not very damaging, but maybe kind of are. For example, my mom really, really dislikes the word irregardless. A lot of people do. Okay. And when I am on my ABC gig, I have a gig on the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Company. That's what it is. I think it's a company or is it a corporation? Not even sure. One of the two. But I do a weekly gig on the ABC in the morning. It's on a real radio station where it goes out to 100,000 listeners. And a lot of people have ideas about language that are, I would like to change those attitudes. Like if you talk a certain way, then you're an idiot, or kids these days are ruining language. The kind of ideas that we hit sometimes. And, sometimes the people who do the content have wanted to do shows like what's the ugliest accent, or what's the worst word in English? What word should be banned permanently or whatever? And those seem fun. They seem lighthearted. They generate a lot of content. Like people come in and say, oh, I hate this word. Oh, me too, but I also really hate that word. For some reason, anger. drives engagement. It's angertainment. Well, yeah, it is unfortunate because when you're talking about language, that's real people who have that accent, or it's real people who are being shamed for saying this or that word or using this or that language feature. And so I try to be gentle and say, hey, that's a language belief, and it might be a little bit harmful. Beliefs are really hard to change, even when they're bad ideas, because if we think of an idea as a part of us. And with language ideas, we really do think of those as part of us because language is a proxy for a lot of things that we are, our race, our background, our social class, our origin. So getting rid of a bad language idea is difficult, especially when it ties you into a community. Being able to change an idea when there's a community behind it is really, really hard. So the answer is have a community yourself. Have a better community, tell better stories. And if you would like to hear more about this, you can check out, I did a TEDx Perth talk a few years ago where I mentioned these themes. But how do you change minds? And the answer is you tell a better story and you provide a better community. And we can build communities. And so I've really taken the idea of community building very seriously because we don't want to belong to communities of unreason where belief in a bad idea gives you a special place, makes you feel special. Let's try to counter that by having good communities, being welcoming, and listening to each other.
I like that. Yes, yes, very nice wrap up there. I wanted to just go back down the list because you brought up some really good tips here. Bringing down the jargon in what you said, or at least making it understandable and accessible. In terms of understanding how to read the room, I really took away practice. It is something you just have to cultivate to really get better at. Having a contingency plan, love that one. Focusing on people's stories and making it vivid, and providing a way to contribute and interact. And also, encourage others to be creative. And then you said to have a better story. Anything I'm missing that comes to mind for you when you're thinking about how you make this podcast and the community around it? Like, how do you make people feel like they belong? Or how are you setting it up so that more people do feel like they belong?
I think you hit a lot of the main points. The main idea that I would give is it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun. If there's something that people enjoy doing, then they'll keep doing it. What's the best way of exercising? Well, the best way of exercising is the one that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, then you will stop doing it. Even if it's not like optimal for your body type or whatever, it's probably going to be the exercise that you enjoy. So make sure that you're paying attention to the fun aspect. Is it working? Do you feel like there's something that needs to change? Keep monitoring as you go. If your organization or your podcast or whatever it is feels bad or feels kind of ouchy in certain ways, then see what you can do to fix that. See what you can do to change that. Make sure that you bring the fun, bring the joy, bring the love, and bring the respect. I'm not religious anymore, but I keep thinking of the words of the Apostle Paul. If you have science, if you have facts, but you do not have charity, then it availeth you nothing. You've got to bring the love. You've got to make sure that people feel the respect, and you've got to bring the joy. Those are an important part of your community building.
This has been fantastic, Daniel. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for listening. It's an honor to be asked.